So Aaron, House of Visionaries, next topic we're gonna cover is demand cycles, kind of linking back to economic cycles. So kind of economic cycles are normally linked to TA demand. And historically, we've always had these 8 to 10 year cycles. So you kind of would know that within an 8 to 10 year window, you're probably gonna see a boom and a bust. But what we've seen more recently with COVID triggering a really volatile environment, we want to talk about and explore is potentially like, has that changed for TA? So will TA go from seeing 8 to 10 year cycles to potentially seeing kind of more condensed volatile cycles of bursts in hiring? So what we've got here is a bit of a graph that we've built which illustrates kind of that. You've got that 10-year curve, which we all know, and then you've got COVID triggered this kind of really spiky growth over like a 3-year window. And now we're about to come out of that again. So I think hopefully in 2024, hopefully early 2024, we will see that curve shift and rebuild. And I suppose the question mark is kind of like what's going to happen next? So are we going to go off on another rapid burst, experience something maybe not as aggressive, but something similar to what we saw coming out the back of COVID? Or are we going to have something steady or something in between? And I don't think anybody really can predict that in the world. I don't think there's someone clever enough to call that. But I think we can plan for it. So the point of this conversation is to understand, okay, we don't actually know what's going to happen. It's impossible. But we could play a few scenarios through and start to build our TA functions ready to deal with them. So there's one scenario where we maybe come out of this next year really hot again. So lots of TA professionals that maybe got made redundant, jumped into a job they just really don't like, but they needed to. Perhaps people that wanted to move but haven't been able to move because the market just hasn't allowed them to. Maybe people that have been treated really badly and feel like it's just not the place for them anymore. But there is a chance when that TA market opens, a lot of people are going to be very interested in the jobs that come to market, and it could trigger this domino effect where the TA market kind of explodes again. That's a possibility, or equally it could come out pretty steady. So I suppose the question is kind of like, let's say we get to January, February, March, and we feel like the market's coming back. And TA functions need to now start to plan for the rest of the year. Kind of how would you start to think about maybe are we going to see this now 8 to 10 year really steady environment? Or are you potentially going to see another huge spike in 2024 and things come back really aggressive? Like what are the first steps you would probably take to be thinking about from like a TA leader point of view to kind of set up for that?
I think it's a really interesting point. I think before I would go into looking at ATS, interview capability, my hiring manager capability, my recruitment team in terms of how they're able to deliver and perform the kind of numbers I'd be thinking of, I would definitely start with the data. So I'd be taking those two scenarios you just mentioned, and I'd be wanting to understand those two different data streams, understanding like what's it going to take for me to get to this sort of end goal and end outcome that I'm looking for. So then being basically reverse engineering back from that. I think once you've got clarity on those numbers and your understanding of like the ratios, and you can see straight away what, in terms of your pass-through metrics and your conversion rates based on your previous hiring, it'd be very, very evident to you straight away where there's going to be some gaps and where you're going to have some real blockers and obstacles that are going to, not allow you to hit these kind of hiring goals, probably on both sides as well. So I think I'd start there, understand the data, reverse engineer that backwards, maybe have a little play around with some of those pass-through metrics. Once I've done that, I think that would then open it up for me to kind of go a bit deeper and kind of look at our overall kind of recruitment operations and activity. And really to start to sort of test and measure the effectiveness of that against these two different scenarios. For example, we all know how important a recruitment ATS is. Your team pretty much lives and dies by it nowadays. And yet that's something that I find from my own experiences, TA leaders are often reluctant to swap and to change.
Yep.
Probably because of the time involved to actually implement those systems.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that myself, it can be extremely painful. But actually to be able to meet this kind of demand that you're talking about, you're not going to be able to do that first and foremost without having the right centralized system in place that your team then hangs off and everything else hangs off. So I think understanding the data, looking at your ATS, reviewing its capability, and being really brutal, right, in terms of that process. It's absolutely fine if your requirements have moved on and the system you once, blood, sweat and tears in to implement is no longer meeting those requirements. That's the reality of the world we live in, right? Things are constantly evolving and changing, and it only makes sense that our requirements are also going to go for a similar pattern. So being ruthless in terms of how I would measure and look at the capability requirements in that system, and having some kind of clarity in terms of, well, what's actually going to be important to me and my team and to the business to hit these business objectives. And I would imagine 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the same old things, right? It's going to be, is this going to create more work for my team, or is it going to enable us to move quicker and faster and be more agile? Yeah. Is it going to, on top of that, right, is it going to give us the data analytics that we need in order to always be on the pulse and be able to course correct and make those small tweaks and changes that are going to be needed to allow us to continue on this nice upwards trend. And then it's like, what else can this system do? Is it going to help us with some of our more kind of, organization-wide goals, like wanting to build a more diverse workforce? Having the right systems in place are going to be key enablers to helping you achieve some of those goals. So I think, that's probably a good place to start. Most people will kind of move from there into looking at the kind of the recruitment steps involved in the cycle of when you would actually hire someone. So you might look at the assessment stage next. Here you might be looking at, your current hiring managers, how effective are they at actually doing interviews? Sounds like the obvious, right? But it's actually normally where I've witnessed most hiring teams fall down. Yeah. You have an exceptional recruitment team who are brilliant at going to market, engaging with candidates, bringing them into the process. And actually it can fall down very, very quickly if your managers aren't equipped and understand how to do things like simple stuff like structured interviewing, for example. So just making sure you've tightened that up first and that you're happy with the effectiveness of those interviews, I think is a good place to move to. From that, I think you can have a good understanding of if they're not at the level that you need them to be in terms of your hiring managers meeting that bar, then actually there's an action there for you and your team to do some more training and more support to them to make sure that they're set up for success to do, their kind of important role in the recruitment process. Yeah. From there, I think you've looked at your central system, you've looked at sort of interview capability, you've looked at where your hiring managers are on that bar. Maybe that might have, got you looking at your resources and the kind of guidance that you already have. So it's often worth spending a bit of time on, how can we better educate the whole business on hiring. I've also been in some companies where they do this really, really well, where everyone in the company is very, very clear on what great looks like. I've also been in some places where they don't. and it's really evident, when you come to hire, especially when you go from hiring at small scale to medium and big scale, if everyone is not completely bought into what talent looks like and what great looks like for your company and how that needs to be measured through your values and the behaviors that you set out to assess for during that process, what you're going to end up with is, an organization that is fantastic on skills, but then skills will get you so far. It's the values and the behaviors that are going to embed those people as part of your organization and help you develop and build the culture that you need, which is going to kind of take you forward. So I think those 3 things are maybe what I would start with that I think would give you a really good initial path to be prepared for that sort of stuff.
And going back to point 1, which I think is really interesting in terms of getting prepared for it and understanding the data before you go into it. I think that element of like reverse engineering a funnel and understanding it, I think is really interesting. So like to bring that element to life. So if you're going to look at trying to predict some funnels for that, you could maybe take what your current funnel looks like and what those pass-through rates look like. And then maybe people could take some data from 2022. So look at previous data, plug that into your current funnel to see what that rapid burst might look like in 2024. So if things go off like a rocket kind of there might be some historical data they can use to plug into that to give them a predictive model. And I think that bit around like interview capabilities, that type of stuff, it will start to build a picture whether you've got a team to do that or not, and where you need to ramp up and what you need to do. I think it's really sound advice to kind of like build from there. I think that's really interesting. And what would you do with like leadership? Is there anything you would do with leadership to influence them around these models? So do you think there is an opportunity and an avenue to maybe go to senior leadership and say, look guys, I've been thinking about 2024. Here's a bit of a graph I want to show you. I think we might come out a bit like this or a bit like this. And if we come out like this is my plan. And if we come out like this is my plan. Do you think that's something that people do? Do you think it would be valuable? Do you think leadership would buy into it? Like, how much of this stuff do you think you need to influence senior leaders with before it happens, I suppose?
I think if you're not doing it, then you need to do it. Yeah. It is as simple as that, because we all, you know, we've all experienced it. We all know as recruiters and talent acquisition professionals. So the business is getting more and more hungry for, you know, better analytics, richer data, you know, insights they can actually use and that are actionable, that help them to understand the problems and the challenges that you know we're facing and they're facing with getting the right people in to perform the jobs that are going to help them to achieve their goals and their objectives. Mm-hmm. So I think if you're not doing this, then you need to start doing it. One, you know, it will instill massive amounts of credibility. As you as a TA leader or TA professional, being able to have those conversations with your business leaders, bringing data to the table is always going to be received and go down well. But I think just showing that you can take it one step further and you can start to not only visualize that information, but start to play through some predicted scenarios and outcomes is not only going to show credibility, but it's also going to help you when you come back into these meetings and you're asking and putting your business case forward to say, well, this is what it's going to take. Yeah. This is what I'm going to need from you in order to deliver on those goals and those objectives. Yeah. So yeah, if you're not doing it, you need to start doing it. And I'd say you'll very quickly notice a difference in how you're received in those meetings. And like I say, you know, you have a seat at the table, you might as well use it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And also, it's good fun, right? These are the conversations we want to be having as TA professionals. This is that visionary space that we want to try and push into. With that in mind, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, and I'll have a go as well. What do you think we're going to come out like in 2024? I don't think there's anybody in the world that can predict it, by the way. But what does your gut kind of tell you? Do you think we're going to come out flat, come out hot at some point, or somewhere in the middle? Like, have you got any thoughts on what you're thinking?
I think we might come out hot to start with. You know, referencing what you said about there will be some of that hangover that carries over into 2024. Mm. So I think we will feel some of that. In terms of what that will look like, I think you hit a nail on the head, right? Is that there's probably going to be a wave and influx of individuals who were impacted by companies having to reduce down in size and let those people go. They would have taken jobs, majority maybe where they weren't 100% happy. You know, I've gone through it myself, right? Where you're forced into a situation where you need to pay your bills, right? And you've got responsibilities, but deep down, you know that this isn't actually what you want to do, and it's not working for a company that has the mission and the purpose that you really truly believe in, which you know actually is important in order for you to do your best work. So I think there will be a lot of individuals going into the Christmas break who are going to be contemplating that, and I think we'll start to see the effects of that going into Q1 and Q2. I think it will start to teeter off as we go towards the end of the year, and I think there are a combination of things that are going to have a massive impact, right? You always just say, like, follow the money. I think in this case, it's going to purely come down to where is that money going to end up. I think, big tech has had its heyday. I think they're going to be feeling the pain of some of the decisions that they made over the last few years for the next few years. But there are lots of sectors that are emerging, that are exciting, that are getting lots of attention and lots of investment. And I think these are possibly going to take the role of what big tech previously and used to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So I think that's how I would predict it. Going into 2025, I think we're probably going to be faced with, like you say, the rise of AI. I think by that point, AI that we have now is going to be completely different to what we see then. With that, you're going to see lots of new capabilities and skills coming onto the market, demand for these skills. That's going to have an impact on businesses and how they react to that and how TA teams react to that. And I think that also you might see another spike then.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I wouldn't disagree with any of that. I think like for me, I haven't got a clue. It depends what day you catch me on. I think sometimes we're coming out hot. Sometimes I think it's going to be super flat. But I do think there might be a case where the curves are polarized around sectors. So a bit like what you were saying in terms of different sectors. But I think the general economy might stay a bit more flat. But I could certainly see these aggressive spikes that come in certain places. And I think TA could be one of them. I think we could see TA kind of have a real spike. So rather than it being the whole economy going on certain curves, I think you might see economy a bit flat or like rising, but like on that flatter curve. And then certain pockets of skills that go through these extreme spikes, of which I think TA could definitely be one of them. I think software engineers could maybe be another one where no one's really been hiring software engineers for like a year. So they might be feeling a similar thing. But the honest answer is I don't know. And it'll be really, really interesting to see how things play out. I'm very intrigued to see what 2024 and 2025 look like. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right. The TA piece will spike. What I'm really interested in is seeing how, again, like this discipline that's been fairly traditional over time, that is, as each year goes by, you tend to have this new specialism that's kind of, formed out of TA. We had employer branding, we had TA operations, we had intelligence. I think there's going to be a new wave of specialisms that are going to form out of TA. So I'm excited and interested to see how that pans out. And I think that will probably form some of these spikes, especially when you think of, again, going back to AI and these new technologies that we're going to have to all start embracing. Well, someone's going to have to become an expert and a specialist in that. I don't know what weird and wonderful job title is going to be.
Like a TA product manager or something, a TA product manager looking at all different types of product that are being used and software that's being used across the TA landscape.
Exactly. But as that software, landscape is evolving and changing, that has an impact on internal teams because we need to become, as strong as the people and vendors who are building and selling these tools. We need to be able to understand it, interpret it, get the value from it. And in doing that, I think you'll see these more new specialist roles come out. The thing that always comes to my mind at the moment is I keep hearing this thing called interview intelligence. And I think that could be the next thing that comes out of internal TA teams, where you have someone who is a real specialist in getting the absolute quality and performance out of that part of the process. We focus on assessment and we focus on how do we upskill our managers. We haven't actually done a lot as a discipline to look at how do we upskill ourselves and what does that look like. And I think interview intelligence will be a big trend, big thing.
I think interview
going
intelligence
into next year.
Yeah, really, really cool. How much do you think that crosses over with HR? So the TA HR blend, do you think it will sit, that responsibility will sit in the HR world or in the talent world or both? Or
selfishly, I want it to sit in TA, in the talent world, but I can see areas where there'll be lots of crossover as well. And I think, when I say interview intelligence, what I mean by that is, someone who is, their job is to granularly look at interview activity and performance and be able to, same way as we do with hiring, be able to understand at a granular level that data and be able to predict future outcomes. And we'll be able to go, well, hiring manager A is stronger at interviewing for this type of capabilities. So how do we scale that and how do we grow that out? And I think that's going to be really, really interesting to kind of build that out. And I know there are tools that are already starting to touch on this and do this. You've got tools like MetaView, which I think we've touched on before, where they're transcribing interview notes. They're already going one step further now to go, what's the interview intelligence that we can offer, overlays on top of that, which then takes that information and will then turn it into a small too long don't read, right, a TLDR. And then I'll go one step further and be like, well, how did that manager perform in terms of effectiveness against the rest of the population, the rest of their organization? And I think, you're going to have people internally that are going to be doing that for internal TA teams. You might get to a place where you've got visibility and can say, well, actually, I know who the top 10% interviewers are in our company. And then it's like, well, how do we then scale what they are doing really, really, really well? And that can completely change the game, I think, for how we assess. And I think, interview intelligence will be an interesting one to follow.
I think that's an interesting concept. It's not something I've heard a lot of people talk about. Probably a whole subject on its own to do something on for House of Visions or something in the future. But no, I find that fascinating, and I think it will be something that's done in the future. But again, I'm not hearing many people talk about that, and I think it is a really interesting concept. Okay, mate. So we'll draw that one to a close. But I think I'm really intrigued to see what plays out in 2024, and I think I'm intrigued to see whether these demand cycles do shorten or whether we go back into a normal like 8 to 10 year window. And is this a new norm? Is this volatile world that we're operating in the new norm? And if so, I think we all need to learn to evolve and live in it. And how do we cope with a volatile hiring environment versus kind of not necessarily moaning about it because it has been terrible. But if it is the new norm, then we've got to find a way to cope with it and deal with it as professionals and navigate it the best that we can. So yeah, it's been a great chat. I really appreciate all of your insight and wisdom as well. I really appreciate you coming down and doing it.
Thanks for having me.
No worries, mate. My pleasure.